Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I love having other professors on the program, and Chris Wallace and I were just discussing the joys and the not so joyous part of teaching, which is all of the grading that we have to do. What I love about Chris as my guest, he's the co-founder and president of InnerView Group, and he is former PR major. So Chris, so excited to have you here. I love talking about the intersection of PR, marketing, digital, all of the different strategies. And I believe that is exactly what you do in your day-to-day.
It is. So don't judge me, Annika. I took a PR degree and went into sales. So my career has primarily been in sales. And over the years, my team and I have really learned, we live sales and sales is in our DNA, but we speak marketing. And so much of what we do is really sitting at that, like you said, intersection. We jokingly say sometimes that we're marriage counselors for marketing teams and sales teams.
Oh, yeah.
So we right at that cross section.
That's the best way to be these days, though. So I'd love for you to talk about, you majored in PR, communications, but then you went into sales. Was sales something you knew you wanted to dive into, or what was that path for you?
Yeah, I always jokingly say that I think sales was more of a birthright than it was I think I was born into sales as opposed to sort of getting into it later in my career. But so a lot of my work, early work in PR was in the sports and entertainment industries. And when you work in the sports and entertainment industry, especially with some of the smaller organizations I worked for a small agency, my first job out of school, and everybody's selling. And I know that that's a little bit of a cliche, but everybody's selling to some degree, right? There's always sponsors involved, and you're always looking for ways to expand your relationships with your sponsors, and especially in the sports business. And so I think that sales was sort of a natural outgrowth of what I had done. And when you think about what you're doing on the PR side, so much of it is pitching, right? It's just a different type of selling.
Exactly.
So I actually went from being on the PR and media relations side of the sports business and ended up on the sales and marketing side. And my first role that actually was a hybrid sales and marketing role was actually with the PGA Tour. So I previously worked with the PGA Tour and a private golf club that they managed. And it was the first time that I actually sat at that intersection between sales and marketing. And it was really interesting for me. And I've sort of taken that thread, and it's been sort of the ethos of InnerView since day one.
Very nice. So we talk about InnerView and what prompted you to go out on your own after getting your experience with agencies and with sports, big conglomerates and all of that. What prompted you to go into entrepreneurship, which is not for the faint of heart, and teaching, and start something on your own?
Yeah, both are full contact sports, as you know, being an entrepreneur and a teacher. But I wish I had an exciting origin story for you. It really was opportunistic. I had a gentleman an executive that worked with us several years back, and he goes, Chris, you're a big return on luck guy. He's like, I don't know many people who take lucky breaks and turn them into, the opportunities that you end up creating from them. But I was at a crossroads where the organization I was with was going through a major acquisition was happening. And I was going to have to relocate. If I wanted to keep my job, I was going to have to relocate. I had just got my MBA. I had a 9-month-old daughter at home. And I said, I don't want to move right now.
Right.
And what ended up happening was I ended up going and doing contract work. I wanted to find something full-time, but I ended up doing contract work, after sort of what happened with the merger. And a contract work turned into 12 and a half years later, pushing 13 years of doing my own thing. So one initial 9-month contract has turned into 13 years of running my own business.
Fantastic. So can you talk about what you do at InnerView and the tactics that you use, the strategies?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to keep it really simple in terms of, the approach we take. We always say it sort of sits at a cross between internal marketing, training. It really does sit, change management would be kind of the third one that I would throw in there. But essentially what we're doing for organizations, we are typically working with the go-to-market teams, the teams that are setting the customer product, service strategy for an organization. And we are helping take whatever those initiatives are, and we sell it to their frontline teams. And when I say sell it, I mean that. I mean, we don't train it. We are not in the Let's get it on a computer-based training. Let's tell people what they're supposed to do. All that needs to happen. We're very much in the win hearts and minds business. So we look at it as, if you want to win your customers' hearts and minds, you have to win your own people's hearts and minds first.
Oh, yeah.
And that step is skipped so frequently. Yeah. And products are launched and they say, oh, well, we're going to drive all sorts of demand for it. And it's not exactly. You need your sales team, your retail team, your call center team, whomever it is that serves your customers. You need them to evangelize it. And if you don't win those hearts and minds first, it's going to be hard to have success for your new initiative. So we are working with these leaders, take their new initiatives and get it into the bloodstream of their own teams.
I love that. The internal teams are some of the most important stakeholders that any organization has. And to your point, so many of them are overlooked. I've been reading so many horror stories of people walking out. I mean, you see what's happening at OpenAI right now, where they believe in the product, but they don't believe in what's going on internally, and they're not being communicated with effectively. And if you can't communicate your messaging effectively with your internal teams, whether it's about a disruption in what you're doing that you're going to put out in the market, or a disruption within the internal workings of who's at the top, you just lose the faith of your teams.
So there's a word you just used that I really want to hit on. Use the word disruption, okay? And I think that most organizations underestimate how disruptive change is for their people. I don't even think they think about it as change. Most organizations don't think of a product launch or a new customer experience program or even a new offer or pricing strategy. They don't think of it as change. They don't think of it as disruption. Let me promise you, it is disruption, right? Frontline teams are tasked with so many different things. And I always encourage people, there's a great article that was in HBR, pre-pandemic, it was probably 2018, 2019, called How to Sell New Products. And it's a professor named Thomas Steenberg. And How to Sell New Products really examines how organizations fail. They underestimate the change management needed to get their teams to embrace new initiatives.
Interesting.
They just underestimate it. They think it's, oh, well, we'll just go through the same process, the same motions we did last time. But every time you launch something new, you're further and further away from that core that your origination, right? Your starting point. So each layer you get further and further away from the core, it's harder and harder for people. And I love that article, and I share it with people all the time because it really does highlight the fact that organizations don't realize how disruptive each new initiative is that they introduce to their teams and their customers.
Wow. Yeah. I'm definitely going to be looking at that article after we get off of our interview. I think it's something important to share. Yeah.
It makes so much sense, but until you actually see it, having it under that HBR banner, as soon as it's there, it gives it credibility, and you can say, you know what, this makes so much sense. I send it to executives all the time and I say, don't take my word for it. This isn't my company's promotional material. This is smart leaders who have done the research and identified that organization, there's a miss here, there's a gap.
Yeah. And you've coined a specific system that you use at InnerView called InFront to help bridge this gap that you're talking about between Frontline and the marketing strategies and external strategies of an organization and their product launches. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go back to what I just said, how I summarized that article of it's very intuitive. It just makes a lot of sense. InFront is kind of a tool that I would put in the same category. What we did with InFront, we had partnered with a market research firm, a company that was doing voice of customer research for big brands. And they showed us their process. They showed us how they were doing it. And we said, do you ever deploy this type of research to salespeople? And they're like, why would you do that? And we said, well, most organizations know what their customers think of them, but they don't know what their own people think of them. And when I say what they think of them, I'm not talking about being able to take a quiz or a confirmation of learning and give you an answer as to product specs. We're talking about, do they think that your value proposition actually works? Do they believe your value proposition delivers for your customers what you say it does? And it's essentially market research that we have turned inside the organization. Wow. So think of it as, we believe very strongly, we have data to back this up for days, that frontline teams can have a significant influence on purchase decisions of customers. We did research with Synchrony Financial and found that on major purchases for the home of $500 or more, that 86% of the time, the salesperson is influencing the final decision. 86%. So when you think about that, we say, okay, if they have influence over the customer, well, you should probably know what's in their head, right? You know what their mindset is going into those interactions with customers. And if you know their mindset, you can influence them better. So if you want to reach your customers, the best way to reach them effectively is through the people that work for you that serve those customers.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the fact a lot of my day-to-day job, we work with adult learners, adult education systems, whether it's community colleges, coalitions, workforce development agencies. And we do a lot of brand sentiment analysis and psychographic and demographic and research to look at the external stakeholders, the student populations that they're trying to meet, right? The organizations, the companies in their regions that they want to use their services and get connected to these students. But we don't often do that work with the internal teams, the actual people on the ground who are the teachers, the administrators, the ones who will be making the appointments with the students to get them onboarded to the right programs at the right time. So I completely, even as a marketer and a publicist, I'm hearing what you're saying and going, oh gosh, I need to look and see, we need to examine our processes and make sure that we are reaching those people as well when we're speaking to our clients and when we're working with our client teams.
It's a great point. It's just a missing data point. And that's where sort of the obvious nature of it comes in. What we've built within Front is, I was talking to one of our partners today and they said, it's revolutionary, not in its complexity, but it's in its simplicity. And it's not hard to understand. There is rigor around it. There is data science behind it. Through years of working with frontline teams across the globe, we believe if we were to calculate it, we are well into the 7 figures of frontline teams that we have, frontline team members we've impacted across the globe. And we know how to reach them. That's our superpower. Our superpower is understanding how to reach them and influence them and drive the behavior that you want, enthusiastically drive the behavior that you want. And we have built it to tap into their brain, to tap into their mindset, their attitudes and their perceptions in a unique way. It's not terribly complex. They are well-structured, targeted, survey-based studies that we do. We're collecting hundreds and in some cases thousands of responses from frontline teams, and we're analyzing that information. We're coming back and saying, here's what your customers think, and here's what your people think, and here's what your leadership thinks. And we're able to stitch together all 3 perspectives. And that perspective of the internal team is the one that's typically missing. Marketers don't have it. They don't look at that audience as a stakeholder. They throw it over the wall to sales operations or to sales management or training and expect that that's going to, close the gap. But so many organizations look around and they say, why can we not seem to get this right? Well, you keep doing it the same way every time. Market to them like they're a stakeholder, and good marketing starts with good research.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear, and you don't have to, of course, give any specific examples if you don't want to or can't, but I'd love to hear a couple of your case studies of an organization that realized that their marketing external strategy was completely off base based on their internal stakeholders, and they had to pivot, and you were able to help them through that process.
Yeah, I can give you a couple of examples. And I think in Front, it's a tool to help organizations optimize. It's not radically overhauling strategy. It really is about every organization has a lot of dots that they're trying to connect. We're able to examine those dots and see which ones are connected and which ones are broken apart. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you one example that I think is relevant. Large consumer technology company that we work with had introduced a new offering to their customers, and introduced into a relatively crowded space in terms of consumer consumption and consumer media consumption and things like that. And that whole go-to-market strategy, how it was priced, how it was positioned and things like that. And their sales reps, their people on the phones, the people in their stores came back and they said, no, this is not resonating with customers. It's being met with skepticism. You position this against a competitor that's only one of many competitors that we're up against on this. And we were able to take that feedback and go back to the organization and say, your price is too low, in fact. But that was the feedback we heard. We heard the price is so low that people are skeptical of whether or not it's even worth their time. Wow. And the perception of value is not there because of how low the price is. And they were meeting resistance because they didn't actually believe that was the actual price, because the competition in the same space charged significantly more. So the tail was wagging the dog a little bit. So we came back to the leadership team and we said, listen, there's a couple of things you need to do. You need to look at your pricing structure. Your team is telling us that they're getting met with consumer skepticism. So you need to look at that. The other thing is you need to equip them to position this against a wider competitive set than what you currently have. Mm-hmm. So that's an instance where the learnings were twofold. There was one around go-to-market strategy and the way it was positioned in the marketplace, where we felt like we heard it frequently enough from the frontline teams that it was worth a look. The second was really about just tactical support. And if organizations are learning things that help them drive better tactical support of their frontline teams, their sales teams, that will go a long way. If you get a little bit of the strategy in there as well, then it's paying for itself many times over, because those are insights you just simply can't get.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And what I'm wondering now is, the product was already launched at a certain price point. Did they take it back, raise the price, change the messaging, change the name so that it had a different market perception?
They changed the strategy altogether. The most immediate thing that they did was they got talking points out to their team around the competition.
Nice.
So, they had built it off of one main competitor.
Mm-hmm.
And that one main competitor, every one of the competitors in the space did have very unique things that they offered. There were unique pieces of content and things like that you could get from certain providers. Tell me if you've heard this story before. The technology people were so focused on the features and functionality that they really forgot about the consumption habits and what they actually cared about.
Right.
They thought it was all about, the speed and the user interface and things like that, when in reality, that wasn't what it was about at all. It was much more about the content. And what we found was the frontline teams were ill-equipped to say, well, we have this content, whereas our competition has X, Y, and Z. And they were so focused on features and functionality, they forgot to actually think about why a consumer would spend their time to use the product.
Yeah. Getting into the weeds and the detail, that happens a lot, I think. Are you ready to take your brand to new heights? Join the Brand Amplifier for Entrepreneurs program. Learn how to build, elevate, and amplify your brand with a comprehensive 10-module course. Learn more about it and other ways to implement our strategies at fullcapacitymarketing.com. Click on EFCM Learning Hub for more information. Can't wait to help you amplify your brand. Do you typically work with consumer tech, certain industries? Do you work with anybody and everybody?
We're kind of agnostic. I mean, we have a couple of categories that we have particular domain expertise. Primarily, we're working with business to consumer or business to consumer. Yeah. But at the end of the day, most of the categories we work in, it is a household or a consumer that's ultimately the buyer. We do work in home improvement goods. So this could be anything from flooring to furniture to wallboard to tile to you name it, to faucet and kitchen fixtures and bath fixtures. So in that instance, and in many cases, it is a consumer making the decision, but they go to market. They have a sales team that calls on distributors or dealers and showrooms and things like that. And we also work in consumer banking. We work in consumer technology, mobile, wireless, telecom, those types of industries. So the common thread amongst all of them, it's typically an aided sale or a high consideration purchase. We don't work with consumer packaged goods. We don't design packaging. But where there's humans involved, those are the industries where we play.
Yeah. And those, I think, can sometimes be the most complex, to your point about really needing to understand the stakeholders and make sure that they understand how to sell appropriately and message appropriately.
That's the class I taught last night, Annika.
Oh, really?
The class I taught last night was about managing services and really managing product service bundles. And most of the companies that we work with, their growth strategies are around introducing new products. In a lot of cases, it's services that complement their products and vice versa. Products that complement their services. That was actually the instance that I just referenced. It was a product that complemented their service. And we live in that all day long. How do you message that? How do you make sure that you're balancing the service delivery and the human aspect of it with the product and the features and functionality? It's hard. It's really hard.
How have you seen the industry change and evolve since you've been out on your own part of InnerView?
Oh man, I feel like I've lived 4 lives, as many of us have. I mean, so I started on my own in March of 2011. So how has it changed? I would say that the power to the employee is real, but and I think COVID accelerated a lot of that. I've seen the balance of influence, if you will, shifting more in favor of the employee. And I think the respect, especially frontline employees. We do work a lot with call center, retail teams, outside sales teams, inside sales teams, and we've seen the respect go up, but organizations still have not figured out how to support, to engage, to energize their people the way that they need. And that's why we see so many people leaving their roles, but they just still haven't figured it out. I've not seen one company that has figured out work from home, hybrid. A lot of organizations close their call centers and all their people are 100% virtual. Helping people feel part of the organization and part of a bigger mission, while they're working remote in their sweatpants, it's really, really hard. Everybody's struggling with it. So I would say that's probably the biggest external factor that I've seen impacting the work we do in the companies that we support is how to engage people in this new working environment.
Yeah. To your point, I don't think anybody's solved that. I work from home primarily. I do go in and teach every once in a while, but unless I have a few sales meetings, that's the only time I see anybody besides my family and my pets during the day. And I think a lot of people are in the same boat, and it is hard sometimes to feel that connection when you're not in person. So what are some strategies that you think companies can use to deepen that connection?
Yeah, I think that there's a number of different things. I think that, I could easily just say, communication, and this may sound a little bit self-serving, but we are just big believers in structured listening and organizations having a feedback loop with their teams. And I think that there's a little bit of a misconception that I think employee engagement surveys sort of created this picture of what organizations are trying to accomplish with their people. We just want you to be happy. We just want you to be happy. Are you happy with how much you make? Are you happy with your work setup, whether it's at home, hybrid, or in the office? We just want you to be happy. And we think it's a different type of listening. It's actually funny. The textbook that I teach in the MBA marketing class that I do, the chapter we had last night really talked about the need for organizations to equip their teams to deliver, especially in service-based industries, to deliver successfully for their customers. Mm-hmm. And it resonates with us because we have said all frontline employees want is to be put in a position to make their customers happy. That's all they want. That will make them happy. They just want to do a good job. They don't want to get yelled at. Yes, is it nice if they have a good cover for, cover cushioning for their seat? Yeah, that's nice. But at the end of the day, if you fully support them and you allow them to serve customers effectively and empower them to serve customers effectively, from what we've seen, that is way more powerful than good break room snacks. So I think that that's something that, in terms of the organizations that are doing well, they're listening in a very intentional way, in a regular way, at regular intervals, and they're trying to understand whether or not their people are in a position to serve customers effectively. All about that interaction, that overlap between customer and employee. We're always looking at that sweet spot. The organizations that are doing that are the ones that we are seeing excelling.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know that I've had many conversations on the podcast about internal stakeholders and particularly frontline workers and the needs that they have. They're the lifeline of a company. They're usually the only person somebody's going to talk to if they're, getting on the phone to an email or what have you to purchase a product.
I'm going to make a bold claim on your show. I don't think I've ever sort of uttered this out loud, but I'm going to make a bold claim. So if your listeners are in the marketing space or past guests that you've had on and things like that, I always tell organizations that if you take the money that you're going to invest in external marketing and you peel off 1/10, call it your demand generation budget. You have a budget for demand generation. If you take 1/10 of that budget and you give it to me and my team to go do what we do to support, rather than going direct to the customer, we go to your employees who serve the customers. If you give us 1/10 of the budget, we can outperform the marketing budget in terms of actual performance.
Wow.
We will outperform it with 1/10 of the budget because think about how many people your frontline team members serve. Think about how many people they have the chance to impact. And the reason I say 1/10 is because one of your call center reps or somebody in a retail store or one of your outside sales reps, they may interact with 6, 8, 10, 20 customers in a single day. So we look at it as the path to performance for marketers. If you really want to lower your cost to acquire, if you want to increase your conversion rates, really focusing on making sure that you have an energized and effective front line, that's going to yield much greater results.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm just thinking about, I'm working with Red Bull on a workshop for some of their employees who are primarily frontline, the people who are out, the events, giving Red Bull away, things
street
like that.
Teams. Yep.
Yeah, all the street teams and the people who go into the retail locations and do the sampling and all of that. And that's part of the conversation is I'm doing a workshop for them on branding, personal and professional branding in the workplace, but tied into Red Bull's values. So I'm definitely going to take some of this food for thought that you're giving me and see how I'm going to incorporate it into their workshop.
Let's run a study with them. Let's find out. Let's ask the leadership team what they believe the value proposition, the positioning of the brand is. And then let's ask the people who are out there as in those, they're ambassadors, right? They're ambassadors of the brand. Yeah. Let's ask them and let's compare the two. And that's what we do with it in front is we compare the people who are spending all the money on marketing, the people making the budget decisions, and then the people who are out there standing in front of customers to see if that message is trickling down. I would think Red Bull's better than most. Red Bull has a very distinct brand, and I would think that they're better than most in terms of alignment, but we always learn something we always learn something interesting where they will say, you know what, we didn't think that was the case. There's something actionable for us there.
Yeah, exactly. Now, when you work with various companies, clients, you said you could take 1/10 of their budget, right? The demand gen, and use it internally and have better results. But I know some of our listeners, they're just starting their businesses, they're newer, they might not have huge teams. So does that apply to them as well? Do you work primarily with larger organizations? Do you work with small, medium-sized businesses?
So we'll work with medium-sized businesses. We're typically not working with the smaller shops, but the answer to your question is the methodology might be a little bit different, but the need is actually probably even greater. Right? Think about, my organization. Yeah. We're a boutique consultancy. We do have people all over the country, all over North America, but we're a boutique consultancy, right? We're a niche provider. I need every one of my people on point, in terms of how we want to serve clients, how we're going to talk about the positioning of what we do. I will say maybe like Red Bull, hopefully my team is better than most. I would hope so, given what we do. But the way our team talks about in front, for example, right? And we do consulting work to help drive the change and build the internal campaigns. But in front is the piece that is just so clear to everyone on our team that it's missing, and they evangelize it every day. I think it's even more important, the smaller the organization is, that you have no dilution of your message, no dilution of your story. The value proposition has to be tight as a drum. And to that point, you do have an ebook that smaller organizations could utilize to start understanding the framework for Frontline, correct? Yeah, so on our site, so the website for Infront in particular is infrontinsights.com. And right there on the main page, when you land on that page, there is a guide to Frontline Insights. And honestly, it's the best piece of content we've ever produced. It's very step-by-step. There's very actionable things in there. The goal of that is to highlight the value of listening, right? It really is sort of this love letter to the idea of the way you can engage your people by listening to them in a structured way. There's no better way to form a relationship and form trust with somebody than to listen to them. Yeah. Listening is such a fundamental act of trust, of empathy, of forming that tight bond. And organizations, just be honest, organizations take their people for granted too frequently. Yeah. The simple act of asking draws somebody closer to you. It knocks down walls. And what we do in that ebook is really talk about why it makes sense and some simple steps that you can take to build that dialogue and build that feedback with your teams, whether you're large or small. Fantastic. So listen and learn, and then utilize and that. Act. Yes. and be willing to act. Listening without action, that will destroy trust really quickly. You have to act on what you hear, even if it's in small ways, even if you just acknowledge, we've heard you and we're working on it. We see too many organizations, anytime I hear somebody say, we're doing a town hall, my eyebrow goes up and I'm like, be careful, right? Like you could be walking into a trap where people give you all sorts of stuff that's on their mind and becomes a complaint session, a gripe session. And the next thing you know, you walk away, you don't even know where to start. You have to have a plan to act before you even start listening. Interesting. So to have a plan to act, does that mean that you need to have some idea, some semblance of some of the feedback you might be getting? No, it just means you have to have a team, you have to have people ready. You have to have carved out space, time, resources, whatever it is, to be able to be thoughtful about what you've heard and then what to do next. We had a call with a client today, and we're in renewal season for 2024. And he said, you've given us so much good stuff, but we don't follow through on it. We're not taking what you give us through our in-front studies. We're not acting on it. We need to build a plan heading into next year that we follow through on those steps. And we go into every study, with that mindset of, we're already thinking about the actions and what we can do to put the wheels in motion even before the study's even sent out. So that idea of getting ready to act even before you have the insights is more about mindset and carving out the space than it is knowing exactly what you're going to do.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very valid. If you don't carve out the space, if you just get moving on to the next thing, as many of us do, especially when you're in that small to medium-sized business space, you're going to see people leave. You're not going to see the results that you want internally or externally.
Absolutely true.
So fantastic. Is there any one last piece of advice that you would want anyone listening who's thinking about how they can make sure that they're testing, that they are using insights from their internal stakeholders to create a better customer experience?
Yeah, so I would say that, I've done a few videos, done some content on LinkedIn recently, and did a poll recently. And there's a big takeaway that I have from this year. And we've talked to a lot of people, many different industries. And what we're hearing from them is very consistent. We're looking to try something new. We put in front of customers and to get the reaction, or potential customers to get the reaction. And even if they're not ready to do it, they're like, this is great. We're really looking for something new. They don't know what they're looking for, but they know that the way they've done it in the past isn't working. It's not working. So my piece of advice is, when you think about whether your organization is large or small, everybody's got to mobilize someone, right? To tell their story, to be aligned with their strategy heading into 2024. Try something new. Try something that feels a little bit uncomfortable. Try something that is going to grab attention. The biggest issue, the number one issue of getting engagement from frontline teams is mindshare. The number one issue is mindshare. What is the number one way that companies communicate with their frontline teams? The number one way. Do you want to take a guess, Annika?
Go for it.
Email. Huh. What is less compelling, less exciting, less motivating than a note that says update from internal communications? And we've seen clients that we're going to send this email out. Email is the number one form of communication to their frontline teams. And people wonder why things get lost in the mix, things get lost in the shuffle, things get lost in translation. If you want them to act differently, you have to show them something different. So I would encourage people to get outside your comfort zones, come up with ways to engage your team, to interact with, to communicate with your team that is going to grab their attention, that's going to force them to pay attention.
Yeah, fantastic. That is great advice. Thank you. I talk often about email in the context of external stakeholders, so consumers, your audiences, how important email can be, but also I know that my email inbox is crazy and I miss emails all the time. So the fact that you're flagging this as something that we need to really investigate and look at and examine and think about other ways that we can reach out to our teams more effectively and in newer, different ways than they're expecting to gain their attention is really, really helpful, I think, for all of us thinking about going into the new year and what strategies we're going to put into place to make sure that we are reaching the right people at the right time, but using the insights of our internal stakeholders.
For sure. It's well said.
Yeah. And do you have a favorite quote or mantra or some words that you live by that you would like to share with us today?
You know what? I picked one up a handful of years ago. It was early on in my time as an entrepreneur. I saw a quote from General Colin Powell. Okay. The quote was, make a decision when you have no less than 40% of the information and no more than 70% of the information. Okay. No less than 40% and no more than 70. If you make it before you have 40%, you don't have enough info. If you make it after you have more than 70, it's too late. So I've really taken that idea of you have to work with good information, but it's like I said before, you need to collect good information, but you have to be ready, willing, and able to act quickly. But I always come back to that as an entrepreneur. I think it really helps me make decisions, and my business partner and I kind of live by that mantra.
Fantastic. And Chris, the best place to send people, is it infrontinsights.com?
Yeah, I would say infrontinsights.com if you want to learn more about what we do, or again, the free ebook is there and available for download. If you want to reach me, and I've had from other podcast appearances, people reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn, ask me questions. Okay. Chris Wallace in the greater Philadelphia area. It is not an uncommon name. So make sure that you see greater Philadelphia, you see InnerView as the company name, and that will be a great place to find me as well. Fantastic.
I really appreciate you taking the time with me today and helping us walk through what it looks like to get really great insights from your internal stakeholders, your frontline workers, people who are going to be speaking to your consumers and making sure that you're leading with that instead of leaving it behind. So Chris, I really appreciate your time. This has been fantastic. And I want to thank the audience for listening or watching another episode of Your Brand Amplified. I'll be back again in a few days with another expert to help you lift up your business. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.